So, Adam, tell me about your journey in Flexitallic so far.
My journey in Flexitallic, quite a long one so far. So I started working at Flexitallic back in March 2019. So I came on board as a business development manager, looking after clients up in Scotland. Uh, did that for about 4 years and then moved into a sales management role, looking after the sales team in the UK. And as of January this year, started my new role as the director of joint integrity solutions.
And what sort of excites you about that role that you've got now?
I think for me, it's really, I think if you think about Flexitallic as a business, we've got engineering at our core. And what really gives me the passion of doing what I do is solving problems for engineers. And with the role that I have now, I feel like I'm in a much better position to add a lot more value to our community, our customers, in terms of providing them with solutions which really do solve problems
Mm.
for engineers on a regular basis.
And we're here to talk about Flexlogics, which is a software package.
Mm.
What sort of interests you about software and joint integrity? Is that something that was,
Yeah,
excites you?
yeah. I think I like software. I like computers and all things digital. Like mobile phones, all this sort of stuff. So for me, working with software, I previously worked at a software company for about a year and a half on a similar type of product, but I like the fact that we can create a solution in software and it's permanent. We can keep adding updates to it, and it's something that helps engineers access solutions globally. So being able to work with software, I don't know, it feels like you can leave your mark on something.
Yeah.
So you can create a solution, it's permanent. Engineers can access it from anywhere in the world, and you can get instant results, or as in you can see instant results from the work that you've done or the team have done by customers signing up to the system and using it.
Yeah. And what process have you and the team gone through to develop the software?
Yeah, okay. Quite an extensive process. So we started working on Flexlogics probably around 2020. So the concept, we're on a regular basis, every month, Flexitallic, we get inundated requests for torque calculations for the gaskets that we provide and the connections where they're going to be installed. So we know there's a need because customers are always asking us to solve problems. So back in 2020, we started working on the concept of a digital solution to expand the service offering that Flexitallic has to offer its customers. And originally, with myself and a couple of others, I created a Microsoft Access database where you could go in, you could select a different flange standard, the pressure classes, the nominal sizes, and ultimately, with some maths behind it, give a torque calc. Previous to that, our engineering team have, over many, many years, used the likes of Excel spreadsheets to solve problems for customers on a regular basis. So what we've really done is we've took all the different ways of working, standardized it within the system. So back in 2020, we created a Microsoft Access database that went to a software company to support us in creating a cloud-based solution.
Yeah.
Since then, the team has grown. We've got a really good guy called Brian Klein, who's our principal software architect. He's taken the system to the next level by making it fully cloud-based, making the user experience, user interface really nice, and really, with Brian and the other team members, developed the system to a point where it's now ready, available for clients to buy licenses for online, or we can set them up for their site, and engineers can use it immediately. So the journey's gone from using Excel spreadsheets to creating a little database to now really going to town on the system and making this full cradle to grave solution for joint integrity.
Right. And with the software, perhaps you could just explain in simple terms what it does and why it's useful.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few main elements to the software. First and foremost, it's a cloud-based system. So the benefit of it being a cloud-based system is that it's very accessible. So most other types of software you have for engineering generally are software that you got to download, install on a computer, Because of that, you've got all the things you need to be cautious of about, installing software, data security, everything. Because it's cloud-based, it's hosted on Amazon Web Services. It's accessible from anywhere in the world. So as long as you've got an internet connection and a web browser, you can access the system. So within the software, there's several modules. The one module we have, which probably gives a lot of our engineering community the most value, is our bolting calculator. So like I mentioned before, when customers would come to us asking for torque calculations, what stress to apply onto a gasket to create a good seal, customers can now log into the software online. They can put in the specification of the bolted connection that they're working on. So a customer may have an ASME B16.5 flange with a spiral wound gasket, B7 bolts, and a certain lubricant. They can put that specification into the bolting calculator, click calculate, and instantly get a torque recommendation, which is in line with ASME PCC-1 and our engineering best practice. So all that knowledge that our application engineers have, a client can access that information immediately and get a torque recommendation, which will make the gasket seal at its most optimum.
Right.
So the challenges that the industry's generally had is, previous to this, a lot of traditional ways of giving a torque figure are through the likes of slide rules or torque table in the back of a bolting procedure. And these tables are probably generated 20, 30 years ago using what's called the Taylor-Forge method of calculating a bolt stress. So a customer would traditionally have a torque figure, which was a percentage of bolt yield converted to torque. So maybe 40,000 PSI bolt stress converted to a torque figure. They would apply that on site. They may or may not get a good seal on the gasket. But what you tend to find is actually using more up-to-date calculation methodologies, such as the Flexitallics methods.
Yeah.
We can actually work out, well, it's not 40,000 PSI you need to apply to a bolt stress. It's 55,000, 60,000 to ensure that you have the most optimum compression on the gasket, but at the same time, not mechanically damaging the bolts or the flanges.
Right.
So there's a lot of companies out there who are using out-of-date torque figures, which potentially lead to either not compressing the gasket enough, which means you generally have leakages on startups, or potentially over compressing the gasket and mechanically damaging it, or stretching the bolts too much or bending flanges, which can cause issues such as dishing on gaskets. So using the bolting calculator, you can put an end to a lot of mechanical issues that you generally find.
And how does the software differ to what's already out on the market? Is there something different or unique about it?
Oh, 100%, 100%. So when you look at different software, there's a lot of software out there by service providers, which is generally used for their own benefit. So a service provider may come on site, a contractor may come on site to do work for an end user. So imagine you've got an oil and gas refinery. It will have a contractor come on site. They might have their own software, which is almost like a working tool for the contractor to follow work instructions. The issue you generally find is all the work that they do using these other softwares. Well, first of all, the softwares that they have are generally installed on a computer. They're not readily accessible.
Right.
They generally do not get updated. So by having an online cloud-based system like we do, updates are rolled out on a pretty much weekly basis at the moment. So a lot of end users, they want solutions where if a contractor comes to site and does work, they want to have full traceability of what's going on their site. Most of the time, they'll give a purchase order to a contractor to come on site, do some bolting work, maybe some flange face machining, some leak testing. The contractor will give a certificate of completion at the end of the job to say that the work's been done, and they'll send an invoice in and get paid for the work. But then say after startup, there's issues on bolted connections. The end user doesn't have access to the information that the contractor had for the work that they performed on those bolted connections. So if they ever need to look back in time and find out what was going on or who worked on a certain connection because it had a leakage and they want to know maybe what other connections did this person work on, they don't have ready access to that information. So that's the benefit of having a cloud-based system where everyone can log in and keep track of everything. First of all, it's the customer's system, so the end user has the system.
Yeah.
They can delegate access to a contractor, so it enforces a contractor to work to the end user's processes, so they retain then all the data, which is great for those guys. And again, because we've got such a large engineering team, so within Flexitallic, we've got, I think, over 30 degree qualified mechanical and chemical engineers. So all the expertise and the logic and the maths that our team have generated over many years of experience is all put into that software. So other softwares generally will have information that's from the internet.
Yeah.
So they'll go on certain websites to get gasket information or bulletin information. So there's a lack of, I guess, traceability to a point of where all the source data actually comes from.
Right.
Within Flexitallic, we've got labs. So we generate our own test data for gaskets. We know exactly what's going on with a gasket in terms of its performance characteristics. So all that data is put into the software. So when somebody runs a calculation on a connection for a spiral wound gasket, that engineer can be guaranteed that the source of the data is fully traceable back to lab testing.
So do you think that with Flexitallic's expertise and knowledge, does that bring something additional to the system?
Yeah, for certain. So something to be aware of is not although we deal with mechanical engineers on a regular basis across lots of organizations, these engineers are busy people. Fixed equipment engineers, reliability engineers, they work on more than bolted connections. They've got to deal with pipe work, they've got to deal with corrosion issues, they have to deal with like welding and other issues that may go on reactors and other things as part of a process on site. Engineers in general, they may have a general knowledge on bolted connections, but with the exception of probably a few people that we know in the industry, they won't have the in-depth knowledge that Flexitallic will have on a bolted connection. So there's definitely a requirement that if you're an engineer on a site and you're working with a flange connection, you might not know what you're supposed to do with that flange connection. You know that you might need to put a gasket in, but you may not know what torque you need to apply. You might not know the right assembly procedure. There's a lot more intricacy that people need when they're working with bolted connections. So our engineering team have the expertise to ensure that process plants have the most optimum reliability on their bolted connection.
Right. So you mentioned about the calculation module. What are the other elements that sort of fit together inside the system?
Yeah. So Flexlogics, it's not just a bolting calculator piece of software. It's a holistic cradle to grave joint integrity management system.
Right.
So if you're working with bolted joints,
such as
the connections that we have here. So we've got some smaller size flanges, some bigger ones. Flexlogics allows a user to have full cradle to grave visibility of what's happening to these bolted connections. So within the system, we've got an asset management structure. So companies will have process plants. They will have sections of those plants, such as boiler feed systems, fire suppression systems, whatever the chemical processes are that they have going through their pipelines. Those pipelines are all mapped out on piping and instrumentation diagrams. So within Flexlogics, a customer can upload their piping and instrumentation diagrams. They can say that between one piece of equipment, could be heat exchanger, to maybe a valve, there's several bolted connections. Within Flexlogics, they can map out those bolted connections. They can link them to a piping specification. So customers can create a digital piping spec. And on a piping spec, that determines things like the flange material, the bolting material, lubricants, the gaskets, and other things. So a customer, once they have a P&ID, a piping instrumentation diagram, they map out the flanges, they can link them to a piping spec, and now they've created a unique identity for that connection in the system.
Okay.
So most of the time, clients do not have unique identification on bolted connections out in the field. So in a shutdown, a connection may be getting taken apart, it might be getting worked on. Somebody could do some machining to that flange and cause a physical change to the makeup of that connection. And if the customer does not have any traceability, if somebody then comes to work on the same connection again in the future, they don't know what's been done to it in the past.
Mm.
Maybe they do, maybe they got some paperwork, but that means then go into filing rooms, looking through lever arch files, trying to find some history of what's happened to that bolted connection. Using Flexlogics, you can create an individual unique identification for every bolted connection that you have on site. And then anytime you want to work on that connection within the system, you can create workpacks.
Mm.
So you might have a shutdown coming up next year. You may be working on 20 bolted connections that you need to take apart, maybe to access a piece of equipment.
Yeah.
You can create a workpack. You can link those 20 connections to the workpack. From that workpack, you can generate a bill of materials. So from the procurement team's point of view within the organization, you can go out to market and say, okay, you need, X number of bolts, new flanges, new gaskets, and straight away generate an RFQ, a request for quotation, to give to a supplier and get the information you need. You can also then have quality assurance and quality control processes built in. So once you've created a workpack, you can then track what needs to happen on those bolted connections. So you've got a flange connection, it needs to be taken apart, it might need to be inspected, it may need some remachining work done to it.
Mm.
Using Flexlogics, you can create working documentation automatically. So you don't need to fill in forms by hand or have a lot of administration work in advance of a shutdown. You can generate processes automatically, step-by-step instructions that contractors can use to follow. And then once all the work's been done, all that information can be populated back into Flexlogics or done live in the system on an ATEX-rated device. And then at the end of the work, the end user now has the full history of what's happened to those bolted connections. So say, for example, a raised face on a flange gets machined down, they now have history that flange face has been machined down. So the next time they need to work on that flange in the future, they know if they go on ID number 21, they can say it's this flange and it's had some machine work done to it. So they need to treat it a little bit more differently than another connection that hasn't had any work done to it.
Right. So it's a calculator, it's a library of the joints, it's the whole sort of holistic picture of all of those connections.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got the calculator, we've got asset management, we've got digital piping specifications, we've got tooling library. So if you have torque or tension tooling on site, or even things like vernier calipers and micrometers, pieces of equipment that need to be calibrated on a regular occasion, an end user can manage all of that systematically within Flexlogics.
Right.
And, we can send email notifications to a client to say, 30 days before the tooling is due a calibration, here's some advance notice.
Right.
So if you ever get audited, you're now very unlikely to fail an audit because you're getting regular reminders that you need to take action before something happens. We also have e-learning. So most of the time, there's a big requirement, especially on top tier coma sites, to maintain good health and safety standards. Using Flexlogics, customers can instantly access training to do with joint integrity.
Right.
So these could be courses such as how to use a torque wrench, how to inspect a flange face for damage, how to install a bolted connection. We then have lots of working documentation from the system using our workpack manager.
Right.
So the working documentation shows things like tightening patterns that you have in ASME PCC-1. The benefit of that is once people are trained using the e-learning, they can follow the tightening patterns, they can use a torque wrench, and they can ensure that the flange is bolted up correctly. So, going across the bolts to make sure that you get a good seal on the gasket without potentially bending flanges in the wrong direction, which can cause issues. So it's a full suite of services and modules that really benefit the connection and the reliability of the connection.
Interesting. So what can a customer expect in terms of the journey that you're going to take them on when they sign up?
Yeah. So we don't just give access to a client and say, good luck, off you go. We really want to work with customers to ensure that they improve reliability and see results from using Flexlogics. So what we typically would do is prior to any potential orders, we would have a consultation session with a client. So whether that's on Teams or going to visit them at site, we'd sit down with probably a mechanical engineer, reliability engineer, maybe a plant manager, and just talk through, how are they currently managing joint integrity on site? And what we typically see is a lot of customers, they'll have issues where they might not even be using control bolting. So you'll find that there may be some lower tier coma sites where a lot of the technicians use spanners. So they don't even know the importance of applying the right torque or stress on a gasket. So we go through a process where we want to put a roadmap in place with a client that isn't just about software, but it's taking them on a journey.
Right.
So ensuring that they move to control bolting, ensuring that everyone's got training. We've got a team of joint integrity engineers that can work with clients to develop bolting procedures. So if they have contractors coming on site, they're not just leaving the contractor to their own devices to do the job, although they're probably very well trained. They give a contractor a copy of their bolting procedure, and this is something we can help draft. That ensures that the contractors are always working to the operator's standards, and that alone creates consistency to reduce risk and reduce any potential safety occurrences. We then provide training, whether that's in person or through our e-learning platform on Flexlogics.
And that's both how to use the software and
how
to actually sort of make use of it in the field.
Yeah, how to use the software, how the bolting procedure ties in with the software. So if you've got technicians on site, they know how to use the software, they know how to get their tightening patterns and torque figures, they then know what to do on the physical connections and how that then relates to the software. But specifically on the software, we put a roadmap in place. So the first thing we'll do, we'll have a kickoff meeting. So that will involve the key stakeholders at a customer site that are going to use the software. So generally, a site will elect a champion. That would be the main point of contact and the person that ensures the software gets adopted within their business. Flexitallic are there to support through the whole journey. So we'll have a kickoff meeting. We'll go to site. We'll show them step by step how to use the software, what all the different modules do, how to use the modules. But then we'll work with the customer to set targets. So it might be that within the first 6 months, the client may want a certain system mapped out within Flexlogics. They can do that by themselves. We can show them how to do it. Or if they want, we can come to site, work with their engineers, do a site walk, and show them exactly how to put data into the system. There's things to consider, such as naming conventions for equipment, for valves, for the likes of the flange connections. We really hold a customer's hand to ensure that they get the most from Flexlogics and that they can use it, immediately.
Yeah.
So not only do we have, in-person support, we can do online video calls to support the customer through the journey. We also have a fully embedded help system.
Right.
So if at any time a customer needs help on, how do I use this function? What does this button do? We've got a library of help articles. We've got online ticketing system. So if there's any feature requests, so say for example, a customer may want a button or a field that does something.
Right.
They can click on help. They can raise a ticket. That gets managed by the software and engineering team, and literally within hours, the customer not only will have a response, but potentially an update to the system to have the new field added in.
Right.
So
that was a question I was going to ask about how you incorporate sort of user feedback or experience. Is there a process that, if you've got a feature request or something like that can be incorporated? How do you do that?
Yeah, so through our online help desk, we've got a full management system that helps us track the requirements from customers. So because it's an online cloud-based system, it's going through perpetual development. So updates are being rolled out almost daily / weekly at the moment. So those could be things like a customer may request, for example, here's an example. So the first client we had, so when we developed the system, we started off with ASME PCC-1-compliant flange standards because we thought they're very common, and why not? It hits a wider market and solves a lot more problems faster for engineers. The first customer we had BS10 flanges on site, and we didn't have BS10 in the system. So we worked with the customer, and in the space of a couple of weeks, we managed to develop a whole library of all the BS10 standards. So you got table A, B, C, D, literally hundreds of different combinations of flange types and the types of bolting and the materials you can have. And we put that in the system, and now they're there. Everyone else gets the benefit because it's online.
Yeah.
So if you logged in one day and it had ASME B16.5, once this work was done, you logged in the next day, it's there available in the drop-down menus.
Right.
And that's something else which differentiates us from the competition. A lot of these other systems, because they don't really have the engineers behind the scenes. So there's companies there which are software companies, great software. However, when it comes to the actual technical capabilities of the system from an engineer's perspective, they may not have all the flange standards. They may be missing lots of materials. Pressure classes may be unavailable. A whole spectrum of gasket information. Flexitallic have got the capability of adding all that information in.
Right. And how long does it take for a customer to become sort of familiar with the system and up and running, if you like?
Yeah. So regarding the bolting calculator, the customer can use that immediately. Right. So first of all, if a client wants to, they can go on flexlogics.com. They can buy an individual license to Flexlogics, which gives them access to the bolting calculator. And within a minute of signing up and putting payment details in, you can access the system and start creating bolt load calculations instantly. And there's a whole suite of like I mentioned, online help for customers to follow as a tutorial of how to maybe run the first connection.
Yeah.
But instantly an engineer can start getting torque figures.
Right.
But then if they really want to take joint integrity to the next level on their site, probably within a week, and that would include us having a kickoff meeting, introduction to our joint integrity engineering team, putting a roadmap in place. Within a week, they could be on a journey of not just using the torque calculator, the bolting calculator, but mapping out connections, uploading P&IDs. The system is very user-friendly. So when you go on the screens, everything is as self-explanatory as it can be.
Yeah.
And it should be very obvious what a person needs to do. It's actually very rare we get requests for help on how to use the system.
Right.
Most of the time it's, okay, we've got this quirky lubricant that we use on site. Please, can you add it in? We find out what the data sheet is for the lubricant, and within a day, the engineers have put that information in and it's readily available.
And in terms of that sort of process of feedback, is there anything that you can share about the experience of customers so far that have used?
Oh yeah. So we've got there's a client that we deal with that's a distillery, and they have had leakages on site, about 2 leaks a week on their process. So they have 100% spirit going through their lines, so very flammable. Caustic systems as well, so a lot of corrosion issues because of the chemicals going through the systems. And this integrity engineer that we've been working with, it leakages all the time because they have a mixture of uncontrolled bolting and not really knowing much about the science that goes into a bolted connection. So using Flexlogics, he was able to determine that if he actually changed from one gasket material to another, he could create much more reliability on the bolted connections. So he's moved to a Flexitallic RGS3 graphite gasket on a certain system. He's used Flexlogics to get his torque figures and show that the stresses are optimal for that gasket and the flange configuration. And literally within a couple of weeks of changing out a few of the gaskets on some problematic connections, using Flexlogics to put in the correct torque figure, all those issues are now stopped. And he was telling me 2 months ago that it probably costs around £300,000 to £400,000 a year in dealing with these leakages, because they cause unexpected shutdowns. So or because it's the white spirit that they produce on site, they then have contamination issues. So they've got to dispose of a whole batch of process that they were working on. So honestly, within a couple of hours of the guy learning the system, putting in some example calculations of the connections that he has on site, coming to his own conclusion by seeing the bar charts that we have in the system, big warnings. We've got smart warnings there. So if you try and put in, like in this instance, if you try to put in the combination of the specification of the flange connection that he had, it would have shown a big red warning against the gasket, saying that the gasket isn't good enough. Consider upgrading to X, Y, and Z.
Right. So you mentioned distilleries there. Are the industries that would benefit from this? Could you just give me an idea of who would benefit from the system?
Ultimately, any organization that has pipework and flange connections, ultimately. However, what we would typically find is upstream oil and gas, for certain, would benefit from the system because of the HSE requirements, especially offshore working. You want to make sure everything is as safe as possible. Flexlogics enables that. But then there's a lot of onshore sites, so chemical plants, power stations, distilleries, pharmaceutical companies, food processing companies, lots of different organizations would benefit. And what we typically find is, certainly in the UK, top tier coma sites, the authorities are becoming more and more focused on the management of bolted connections. Flexlogics is an out-of-the-box solution which allows full visibility of the bolted connections and helps these organizations ensure that they work safely.
And within those organizations, is there a typical type of user who would be able to use the system?
The typical user, because the system's quite a holistic system, there's different modules which benefit different people within an organization.
Right.
So first and foremost, the bolting calculator instantly benefits mechanical engineers. So mechanical engineer, fixed equipment engineer, reliability engineer, integrity engineer, they will at some point in time have to deal with bolted connections. And most of the time, they will be referring to the old slide gauges, a torque procedure. It may not have all the information they need to address those connections as accurately as possible.
Yeah.
So they could use Flexlogics immediately. Planning teams will have requirements to create bills of materials and plan work scopes for upcoming shutdowns. That is a process which takes a lot of man hours, a lot of administration. So, for example, working with one of the clients that we have on down the south of England, they have a planning team that in advance of a shutdown need to create lots of documents manually. So they're taking photos, they're using different systems to get data. Using Flexlogics, all that information can be pulled together automatically. And it literally cuts down hours upon hours of planning work.
Right.
Just by being able to say that you're going to work on these 5 connections, click a button, generate a workpack, there's the bill of materials, there's all the forms pre-filled.
Right.
So it saves a lot of time, but also saves a lot of human error on the document creation. So it's good for those guys. Anyone involved in safety, they will of course want to ensure that their companies are working as safe as possible. Using Flexlogics, you're going to prevent potentially leakages.
Yeah.
Because you're going to ensure that the flanges are connected the best way possible and the gaskets have got the most optimum tightness on without causing mechanical damage to the bolts of the flange. So using Flexlogics, companies are going to work safe. So if anyone's involved in safety, there's an out-of-the-box solution that really helps improve safety on bolted connections. In most companies, if you think about a power station, they probably have 10,000 bolted connections.
Wow.
An offshore operator, probably on an FPSO, will have about 40,000 connections. An oil and gas refinery probably have between 100 to 200,000 connections. Every bolted connection is a potential leak path. It's a potential hazard. And if you can do something which, en masse, can reduce the risk of 100,000 connections, you are drastically reducing the potential of a safety occurrence happening on site.
How do you see the product evolving over time?
It's a great question. I see Flexlogics becoming akin to what CAD software is to a design engineer. Flexlogics is the go-to software solution for bolted connections. So if you're anybody that has to deal with a bolted connection, Flexlogics is the software that you can use that ensures that you work safe, you have all the right information, you know what torque figures that you need to apply. It's just the go-to solution for bolted connections, full stop.
Right. And what reaction do you get from engineers when you show it to them for the first time?
Oh, they love it. They love it because they're always scratching their head in terms of what they need to do regarding bolted connections on site. Like I said before, most engineers may deal with bolted connections maybe once every other month. And when they do, it's not like everything's fresh in their head of what they're supposed to do to address issues that occur. So knowing that they've got a system that they can access immediately, it's got the full backing of Flexitallic's engineering expertise. They know that if they use the bolting calculator, they're getting the same response that they would have got if they had an engineer from Flexitallic come to site and then walk them through all the calculation methodology.
Right.
So they're getting instant results, which they really like. So it speeds up access to information. So traditionally, they're not having to ring somebody who could be on holiday. They're not having to send emails. They can just get instant access to information they need. But they also like the fact that there's an engineering help desk in the system as well. So if they have any issues which are maybe out of the bounds of software, so they really have a connection that is bothersome, like a bad actor on site, a big reactor, something like that, where they've tried everything, they can go on the engineering help desk, raise a technical support request, and, you know, immediately have an engineer phone them to talk through what the issue is.
Right.
And come up with a solution, which could be a change of bolt material, it could be a new gasket design, it could be a change of the torque figure, it could be a full holistic EN1591 design review of that connection. But then all that information is then stored within Flexlogics. So in a couple of years' time, if the customer ever needs to go back to working on that heat exchanger again, they've got all the information within the system that they can access and then give to the contractors. So they like the versatility of just being able to get information fast, immediate results, and the expertise of Flexitallic at their fingertips.
Sort of coming out a little bit further, how does Flexlogics fit into the overall strategy of Flexitallic?
Yeah. So Flexitallic, I'd say at our heart, we've got problem solving at our heart in terms of ensuring that connections do not leak. And we've got a myriad of sealing solutions to ensure that we're taking things to the next level through Flexlogics. So not only can we advise the best in class sealing materials, but we can also look at the overall connection and keep track of what's happening on that. So there's a demand from clients to, you know, more and more to go digital. So using Flexlogics, we can do things where we can create QR codes. We can put them on tags, which can go around the flange. They could go on valves. They can go on heat exchangers. A customer can scan the QR code and it'll take them immediately to the record in Flexlogics of all the information to do that bolted connection. So
including the gasket.
Including the gasket. You know, so a lot of the times, a lot of issues we see with customer, or they see, is they might have an issue on plant and their technicians may take a gasket out of a flange connection and they'll go to stores and they'll look on the shelves to try and find out what's the matching gasket that they've taken out. But they've done that without checking whether the gasket that was in there originally was actually the right gasket in the first place. Using Flexlogics, they can scan the QR code on the side of the flange. It'll take them to a record of that connection. It'll tell them exactly what gasket to use, including its part number. And then they don't even need to go to stores anymore. They can contact Flexitallic. I need gasket 1, 2, and 3. And they get it immediately. But not only do they get the gasket, they've got their torque sheet. They know exactly how to assemble the gasket back into the connection. And we've just really taken that customer service to the next level through Flexlogics.
Right. You've mentioned joint integrity and flange management. How would you sum up the idea of sort of total joint integrity?
So total joint integrity, I think just to confirm what total joint integrity is. So at Flexitallic, we see total joint integrity as it's an ambition for a customer to raise the bar on their joint integrity processes on site.
Yeah.
So anything they can do to improve joint integrity feeds into this ambition of achieving total joint integrity. And within Flexitallic, we've got a lot of things we could do to assist the company in achieving total joint integrity. So we've got Flexlogics first and foremost as a flange management solution. We've got best in class sealing technology, so all the gaskets that we design and manufacture on a daily basis. Flexitallic, we have within the company, we've got Integra Technologies, who are a state of the art services company that really know the practical sides of working with bolted connections. So they've got a lot of products such as tension tooling, hydraulic nuts, lots of components which also feed into ensuring optimization of bolted connections.
Right.
We've got a global engineering team that assists customers on a daily basis. And then we've got the ability to provide training. So really, we've got a whole suite of services that we can offer clients that feed into all the steps needed to improve total joint integrity on site.
With Flexlogic sort of acting as almost an umbrella for...
or a good foundation.
Yeah.
You know, once you start using Flexlogics, you can then say, okay, I'm now going to manage our torque tooling more effectively. Or I'm now going to ensure that we're using control bolting, but to get our torque figures, we'll use Flexlogics to get the torque figures. We're going to make sure everyone is competent on site. So anyone that's going to work on a bolted connection needs to have a certain level of ability to ensure that work is done in the most safest way, but effectively as well. Using Flexlogics in the e-learning platform, you can set a standard on your site of minimum expectation from anyone that's going to work with bolted connections. You can then also set competency levels of people on site. So you may have people that you might only want to work on maybe low risk connections, or maybe there's a certain group of people who are more well trained that you're going to allow to work on your more critical systems. Using Flexlogics, you can assign criticality ratings to connections, and therefore only certain people can work on those critical connections.
Interesting. So as we sort of draw this to a close, for you personally, what are the three things that you're most proud of in relation to Flexlogics and the work that you've done?
I say, first of all, it's not the work I've done. It's the work the team have done within Flexitallic on getting to where we've got to within the system. So I think having the industry's best bolting calculator is a milestone. All that engineering expertise we have as an organization, being able to put onto a digital platform that anyone around the world can access is great. So having that available is certainly one of them. Seeing the results, even with just a couple of the initial customers that we had, seeing the immediate results. So going back to the example of the distillery, knowing that an engineer on site has been able to use the system, realize that there's a more optimum Flexitallic sealing material that he could use to improve reliability on site, and within a month not have leakages, is great to see. That because ultimately that's us ensuring the customer works safe. And then finally, just knowing that this is just the beginning. We in the next few years, as we have more and more features added into the system, more and more solutions to offer clients, being able to just build upon what we've done so far is exciting.
Great, thank you. Final question. You mentioned earlier about the time-saving aspect of Flexlogics. What would you personally do with the time that you would save using Flexlogics?
If I was an engineer?
Yeah.
Solve more problems. No, I don't know. I think, there's lots of, I don't know, for me personally, focus on more proactive scopes of work. So a lot of engineers are having to act reactively to problems that occur on bolted connections. So typically what you might, here's an example that we see regularly. So certain clients might have seawater systems, and a piping specification, which never gets updated, will specify a graphite-filled spiral-wound gasket. So what happens is when a customer has some unplanned maintenance or shutdown event, so even if it is planned, they'll come and take those bolted connections apart, maybe to get at a valve that they might need to do a refurbishment activity on. Once they take that valve out, they realize that the flange face has got corrosion, which they didn't expect. So now they have to deal with that corrosion. And if that's offshore, that means getting more people offshore, more machinery. You're potentially now putting people in a more dangerous situation because you're having to do extra work. It's very costly. Using Flexlogics, they could do an analysis on the piping specifications, on the integrity of a connection, and come to the conclusion, actually, these gaskets and this media do not mix. So using Flexitallic's compatibility matrix that we have within the system, they would know in the future, actually, let's just swap these materials out for different materials which aren't going to cause us these issues. So engineers will save a lot of time, which then means they can focus more on, modification work that helps make more production for the asset that they're working on.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.